تحياتنا لكم متابعينا من واتساب ميديا نتورك. شو الأخبار؟ ويب تي في معكم حسين هاشم وحلقة جديدة من برنامج إسأل الخبراء. أكيد حلقتنا اليوم حلقة طبية بامتياز. نتكلم من خلال هذه الحلقة ومع ضيوفنا عن موضوع مرض السكري أو الديابيتز، وكمان النظام الصحي والتغذية والدايت اللي نحن بنعمله والأكل اللي بناكله وعلاقتها بصحة القلب وصحة الأوعية الدموية وكل هذا الموضوع. اليوم ضيوفنا هن كل من الدكتور تمام محمد، الدكتورة سبلا علي، وأخصائية التغذية سارة شوقير من هارت اند فاسكولار انستيتيوت، موجودين بميشيغان بثلاث مناطق، بديربون، بديترويت، وبمدينه ساوثفيلد. اكيد انتم متابعينا كمان فيكم تشاركونا موضوع الحلقه من خلال تعليقاتكم، من خلال اسئلتكم على بمربع التعليقات اكيد، وان شاء الله نحن بنجاوب على قدر ممكن من السؤالات. على طول بنطلب منكم تكونوا متفاعلين معنا لحتى تحلى الحلقه، فاكيد في انتظار اسئلتكم وتفاعلكم على وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي، على قناتنا على اليوتيوب، وكمان على صفحتنا على الفيسبوك. وتحياتنا للكل اللي بلشوا يتابعونا على الفيسبوك. اكيد رح يبينوا سؤالاتكم ان شاء الله على الشاشه من تحت، كل ما حدا يكتب تعليق او سؤال لحتى نجاوب عليه. اليوم ما بدنا ناخذ من وقتكم كتير اكيد لحتى نوصل لموضوع الحلقه ونحكي معلومات مفيده لمتابعينا. فخلوني رحب بضيوفي لليوم. رح نبلش ببدايه الحلقه مع كل من الدكتورة سبلاء علي، موجودين على الشاشة عم تشوفون، وكمان سارة. رح نبلش نحكي عن السكري، ولأنه هيدا اختصاص الدكتورة سبلاء علي، ورح نحكي عن التغذية والنظام الغذائي اللي هو كمان اختصاص سارة شوقير، وكمان بينضم لنا بعد شوي الدكتور تمام. وبنفوت هودي الموضوعين بموضوع أمراض القلب وصحة القلب وكيف له علاقة بهيدا الموضوع. أهلا وسهلا فيكم ضيوفنا. مساء النوري، اهلا وسهلا فيكم. بدايه الحلقه، كونكم يعني اول مره بتطلعوا معنا على الويب تي في، يمكن دكتوره علي طلعتي معنا قبل مره على الراديو، بس قبل اول مره اثنينكم تطلعوا معنا على التي في. رح نعطيكم فرصه هيك شيء اذا بدكم 30 سكند تعرفوا عن حالكم، عن الباك جراوند تبعكم شوي قبل ما نبلش حديثنا لليوم. فتفضلوا.
Hello, I'm Sablaa Ali, endocrinologist with the Heart and Vascular Institute. My specialty is diabetes, metabolism, as well as hyperlipidemia, cholesterol, and thyroid diseases, as well as endocrinology in the study of hormones.
Hello, my name is Sara Choucair. I'm currently the nutritionist here at Heart and Vascular Institute, still studying at Wayne State University to finish up my schooling and hopefully applying to a registered dietitian program.
يا أهلا وسهلا فيكم. هلأ أكيد وعدونا الصبايا اليوم بدهم يتحدثوا قد ما فيهم عربي، فرح نحاول ما تحدثوا عربي، أنا ترجم فأكيد مثل ما كانوا عم بيقولوا الدكتورة سبلا علي هي اختصاصها في أمراض الدرقية مثل ما بيقول، و السكري، أمراض السكري. وسارة اختصاصها في التغذية، وبعدها عم بتكمل اختصاصها في جامعة وين ستيت. طيب خلوني أنا أبلش بموضوع السكري دكتورة علي. فيما يتعلق بموضوع السكري، إذا بتعطينا كمان كشرح عن السكري بطريقة يعني مبسطة، شو هن مثل ما بعرف أنا في أكثر من نوع لأمراض السكري، شو هو كمان إذا فيك تقولي لنا شو هن النوعين إذا ممكن، أو إذا في أكثر من نوع، وشو هو النوع اللي له علاقة بالأكل والنوع المخصص بالأكل، هيدا يمكن أسباب تانية غير الأكل.
So diabetes, usually most people, when we think of diabetes, type 2 diabetes. Over 90% of the patients who are diabetics have type 2 diabetes. This is the one that's more related to foods that we said before. The primary issue here is several issues, and this is a problem with insulin or processing sugar in the body. We also have type 1 diabetes. This is more of a deficiency in insulin. This is often seen in children. Many people think about it as such, but we can see it in adults too. But it's a much smaller percentage of our overall diabetic patients. Usually we focus on the type 2 diabetics, which is the great majority, over 90% of the patients.
بشكل عام عم بتقول الدكتورة في نوعين من السكري، نوع التايب 1 والتايب 2. التايب 2 هو أكثر شيء بيشتغلوا عليه، هو له علاقة بالنظام الغذائي تبع الشخص. التايب 1 ما له علاقة بالنظام الغذائي، مزبوط؟
Right. Of course, it plays a role adjusting it, but it's not the same as type 2 diabetes. It's more of an insulin issue, a different kind of insulin issue.
طيب بس بشكل عام مرض السكري دكتورة علي كثير عالم بيفكروه هيدا انه مرض وراثي، انه اذا بيك او امك عنده سكري معناتها انتو رح يطلع عندك سكري. هل يا ترى هيدي الفكرة مزبوطة ولا لا؟
So to an extent there is a pattern in the family where it can be seen in families. It doesn't mean automatically you're going to have it. If the parents, the mother, the father, there is a higher chance, especially if it's a first degree relative, meaning it's an immediate family member like a mother or a father. So that increases the risk. So this is we use it as part of our evaluation as well. So when we have patients who have a first degree family relative like that, we do recommend that they are tested at one point for screening because we do find a pattern. It's not 100%, but it is a higher risk.
عم بتقول مش 100% اذا واحد بيو او امه عنده سكري يعني هو رح عنده سكري، بس النسبة انه الشانس او الفرصة انه يطلع عنده هو او هي يطلع عندها سكري اذا حدا بالعائلة عنده سكري بتكون اعلى من غيرهم. لما انتم عم تعملوا فحص لحتى تعرفوا حدا معه سكري، هل يا ترى هو هيدا الفحص تبع انه واحد بشك ابره انه بيعملوا له مثل دات وبيشوفوا المشين انه طلع فور اكزامبل اكثر من 120 او شيء، ولا لا بتعملوا له فحص دم لحتى تطلعوا على شغلات تانيين على الهيموجلوبين؟ انا سمعت بتطلعوا اوقات لحتى تتاكدوا انه عنده سكري.
Exactly. So هذا الهيموجلوبين A1C usually فحص دم. So we draw the blood. We actually draw it from the arms usually. It's more accurate from the finger check. That we use for routine testing when we have someone who has diabetes. This is more for screening afterwards. But to diagnose, let's say a new patient, usually we look for certain characteristics. You mentioned the sugar of 120. So we usually use sugar over 125 to suggest a higher likelihood of possibly having diabetes. It doesn't mean that if it happens one time, this exists, that there is diabetes. We have to duplicate it more than one time. It has to be when a patient hasn't been eating food. So that's in answer to the 125 sugar. But the A1C, as you were discussing, the hemoglobin A1C, this is glycated hemoglobin. That's the sugar. That's a long-term average because it's the sugar puts red blood cells in the body.
تمام. دكتورة علي هذيك المرة لما طلعتي معنا على الراديو حكيتي عربي، هلا ولا كلمة عربي.
I'm going to try more.
مرقيلك شوي. سو بشكل هلا بدي ارجع افسر انا شغلي اليوم. فبشكل عام عم تقولي هل يا ترى انه اكيد انا بدي فوت اكثر بالديتيل عن الطريقه وعم بيجي سؤالات اكيد بناخذهم هودي السؤالات، بس يصير عندنا فرصه اكيد متابعينا فيكم تكتبوا سؤالاتكم كانوا بالعربي ولا بالانجليزي، وان شاء الله نحن بنسال سؤالاتكم لضيوفنا وبيقدروا يجاوبوكم على سؤالكم اكيد. ف إذا بدي أنا أعطي straight answer دكتورة علي، هل يا ترى which more accurate، هل يا ترى الفحص اللي بينعمل بهيدا الماشين العالم 3/4 عندهم إياها، ولا الفحص اللي بينعمل عند الدكتور اللي هو بتطلعوا أنتوا على الهيموجلوبين AC إذا أنا غلطان؟
No, اللي بيعمل عند الدكتور it's more accurate.
اللي بيعمل عند الدكتور هو
more accurate. They're different. The one at home هذا بيفحص السكر هلا بهالوقت. هذا مو للهيموجلوبين A1C. عندنا واحد منه بالعيادة. We can check that as well. But usually for new patients, we do draw the blood to check, and that's more accurate. Especially if we're not drawing the hemoglobin A1C. Especially if it's a sugar level, because the sugar level, if you're checking at home, as عم يفحص بالبيت, it can be variable. And also from the finger is different. It's in the capillaries, smaller blood vessels in the finger, which can be different compared to the vein that we draw from the arm.
أي وقت لازم الواحد أكتر شيء بيكون هو المعدل المضبوط رح يتاخد؟ أي وقت هو أكتر شيء بيكون مضبوط إنه واحد يعمل فحص سكري بأي وقت بالنهار؟
So الصباح this is fasting. So at least 8 to 10 hours fasting from the night before. This is fasting.
لازم 8 ل 10 ساعات 8 ل 10 ساعات ما يكون عم ياكل الواحد.
Exactly. And so this is the 125. If we have constantly over 125 sugar at that point, this suggests diabetes mellitus there because it's a higher sugar than what's considered normal. Normal would be تحت ال100 وبين ال100 وال125 بيكون intermediate pre-diabetes, the borderline.
So هو أنا حسب ما بعرف المعدل هو من 80 ل 120 مزبوط. إذا واحد ضمن هيدا المعدل بيعتبروه هيدا معدل طبيعي.
80 لل100. بين
80
100 و
لل
125 بيكون البري دايابيتس.
والله.
ال 125 بيكون suggestive of diabetes. But you compare with the hemoglobin A1C. So the hemoglobin A1C, this is a percentage of the sugar average for the last 3 months. So, for example, hemoglobin A1C normal, meaning that there's no diabetes, 5.7%. Below 5.7% is normal. Again, between 5.7 and 6.4% is the borderline pre-diabetes. And then 6.5% and over is consistent by definition with diabetes. So they go together because a hemoglobin, please.
بس تقولي border line diabetes يعني عم بتقولي انت يعني هيدا على حدود صار، او هيدا الشخص المريض او الشخص هو على حدود انه رح يفوت بالديابيتس. شو الفاكتورز اللي بيخلوه؟ تفضلي.
The chance for diabetes, just to elaborate, the chance when it's borderline or pre-diabetes, there's a higher chance of going into diabetes. So we have to pay attention when this happens. This draws our attention to make sure we don't progress further into diabetes.
اوكي، كثير منيح. هيدا نقطة كثير مهمة باي ذا واي، لأنه حسب ما كان معتقد قديم عند العالم إنه أنت 80 ل 120 you're fine، يعني حتى لو طلعت 120 118 أنت you're fine، ما لازم توقف حلو، ما لازم تنتبه لأكلك، you're good. قبل ما انتقل لموضوع السكري فوق ال 120، أكيد نحكي مع سارة عن الأكل بهذا الموضوع. الأشخاص اللي عندهم تحت ال 80 اللي بيقولوا عندهم هبوط بالسكري، هيدي شو بيسموهم هودي الأشخاص؟
So that could be hypoglycemia. So that depends on why. So low blood sugar. So under 80, it can be normal in some patients, also depending on the circumstance. Not every lower blood sugar, let's say for example 75, doesn't necessarily mean this is abnormal. This just means we should evaluate and find out why, what is the cause, and also look into it a little bit deeper.
نعم هيدي انا بعرفها، في اكثر من شخص بعرفهم بيقولوا انه نحن عندنا هبط السكري معهم، بيقولوا لهم خذوا كيلو سكري او كيلو سكر او كيلو شيء سكري، كيلو سكر او حلو او شيء لحتى يطلع السكري يرجع معكم.
We see it sometimes. And just as a side note also, just to explain, in patients, sometimes we have patients who have diabetes. If they're used to higher sugars, let's say sugar 250, 200, and once we look at the sugar, sometimes they feel like it's dropped a lot just because it's a new change. So sometimes that happens as well too.
كثير منيح. طب سارة، بهيدا موضوع الأكل، العالم مثل ما بتعرفي في عالم بيقولوا أنا عندي سويت تيس، يعني بيحبوا يأكلوا حلو كتير بشكل عام، يعني مثل أشخاص مثلي أنا بحب أكل حلو صراحة، بس هلأ موقف شوي يعني. بس إنه بنقول نحن we always give the excuse إنه نحن we have a sweet teeth، بنحب ناكل حلو. كيف في شخص لما بيخطر على باله حلو مثل شوكولات مثل حلو انه يروح الشوجر كريفينج هيدا اللي عنده اياه؟
يعني امرار واحد بس ياكل، تعال نقول مثل العشاء او ياكل a certain meal وراها دغري بيحس انه اوكي I need something sweet. عارف شو قصدك؟ What I recommend typically so what I recommend typically is wait about like 10 minutes, give it some time, because sometimes during that 10-15 minutes get out of the habit of like walking away from being around the sweet food. That can get your mind off of it. Or what you can do is maybe even have like mints or little like candy stuff like that by you, because that's a lot less calories. Or you can aim towards like reaching for a fruit, يعني تنقول مثل something healthy, a healthier fruit option, you know. You do want to aim towards the healthier side. So if it's something you can't control after a certain amount of time, I would say you can go ahead and have something more like on the healthier side. So fruits, any type of fruits that are there, that would be very helpful.
So دايما اذا واحد عنده، بس اذا بتسمحي لي بهذه النقطه دكتور علي، واكيد يتفضلي بترجعي بعدي، بس واحد يكون عنده سويت كريفينج افضل انه يلجا للشغلات الطبيعيه اللي هي في سكر طبيعي مثل الفواكه عم بتقول سارة. واذا ما بحب ياكل فواكه، شو في alternative يعني كمان يكون منا كتير بتضر غير الفواكه سارة، قبل ما انتقل للدكتورة علي كمان؟
So كمان this gets me to a topic أنا بحكي a lot of my clients about it when they come in. في something اسمه 80-20 rule. So 80% of the time عم ياكلوا healthy following a diet، و 20% إذا عندهم craving خليهم ياكلوا what it's something هن they like. تعال نقول أنت هلا what do you crave after you eat something? For example, what's something you crave? شو بتحب you know?
شو ما في حلو يا سارة اللي بدك إياه كل شيء حلو.
Okay, so إذا بتضلك بالكالوري رينج تبعولك وبتاكل هالحلو يعني مرتين بالأسبوع هيك بتساعد if you slowly cut it out you know. So مش عم نقلك دغري توقفها بس إنه على مهلك slowly maybe start 3 days a week 2 days a week you know you can still have something sweet once a day if you stay not once a day like twice a week if you stay in the range of your calories.
طب كونك عم تحكي عن موضوع الكالوريز ما انت بتعرفي نحن كشعب عربي وكشعب شرقي وكشعب جالية عربية ما نحن الميل اللي بناكله اذا قديش قديش مسمح لنا كالوري لشخص قديش مسمح له كالوري انتيك بالنهار؟
لا everybody is different so يعني each person it's different calories everybody's body is different.
يعني بشكل عام يعني اعطيني فور اكزامبل انا انه بخي انا عمري فور اكزامبل 32 سنة I weigh around 200 pounds. What's my calorie intake should be a day?
It varies. I mean, it really does vary. So what you said how much do you weigh?
200.
200 pounds. And what's your height?
يعني 5'8". 5'9", 5'8".
I mean, it would vary between 1,700 to 2,000 max, but I still feel like I can't give out, you know, certain numbers.
أكيد ما عم نحكي إحنا ما عم نحكي exact number. نحن عم نحكي إنه بس أنا بدي وصل فكرة. أنا مش أنا بدي من هون بدي وصلك لفكرة إنه رحتي إذا أكلتي صحن ملوخية إذا أكلتي صحن ملوخية أو كلتي لك صحن ما بعرف شو هو هودي 2,000 كالوري خلص. تفضلي دكتورة علي.
So for someone, let's say generally speaking, it takes into account the weight and also activity as well. So everybody, you have to think of calories, whether it's to maintain or to lose weight. So let's say for someone, for example, my weight or height or your weight and height, we're looking anywhere from 1,800 calories to 2,000 calories to maintain your weight, for example, for some of the numbers that you gave us. This is for no change. So this is not for weight loss. This is for maintaining. So we're kind of looking at that kind of at that value.
طب كشخص عادي دكتورة علي وسارة كشخص عادي ما بيعرف بقصة الكالوريز خي أنا كيف بدي أعرف إنه إذا أكلت رز هالقد فيها كالوريز وإذا أكلت لحمة هالقد كالوريز إذا أكلت تشيكن هالقد كالوريز وإذا أكلت يعني how do you know أنا قديش الكالوري؟
So الجول إذا هو الجول weight loss الكالوريز طبعا بده يكون under كيف قالت هلا دكتور علي انه الواحد اذا بده maintain weight lose weight or gain weight it all depends the calories so you always want to eat what is it that you want to burn more exactly. So you want to burn more than what you're eating you want to بدك تاكل عرفت شو قصدي انه you want to burn more calories than
اذا بدك تخسر weight بدك تحرق اكثر كالوريز من انه بدك تاكل يعني هذه بشكل عام الفكره العامه اذا واحد في اكثر من شغله عم بيحكوا عنها ضيوفنا هي انه شو هدف الشخص هل هدف الشخص انه يحافظ على نفس الوزن الموجود فيه او هدف الشخص انه يخسر وزن وفي بعض الاشخاص هدفهم انه يربحوا وزن في كثير عالم تتفاجئ بس في اشخاص كمان بدهم يربحوا وزن كمان فحسب شو هدفه للشخص ساعتها تفضلي دكتورة عندك شيء تعليق على
I'm so sorry, but just in answer to your question, there is particular numbers. So there is a way, we do have certain formulas, you know, our dietitians and nutritionists can also help with that. For each, let's say for a person's weight, we do have formulas to help the patient decide what is their total, you know, calorie maintenance for that day. So it'll be based on a certain amount of calories, whether it's between, you know, 13 or 15 or 10 calories based on each kilogram to decide what their actual baseline weight is for their actual baseline calorie measurements to start with to maintain. Then based on that and their needs and other things like their activity levels, their ability to change diet, we decide how much of a deficit they need in order for weight loss after that. This is where we individualize also.
طيب دكتورة علي خليني ارجع لموضوع السكري ومن خلال موضوع السكري بنحكي عن اشخاص اللي عندهم سكري كيف فيهم يسيطروا شو هو نظامهم الغذائي لانه كمان مش بس الاشخاص بيطلعوا على الكالوريز وعلى الدايت وعلى النظام الغذائي بس لحتى يخسروا وزن او يربحوا وزن. في اشخاص كتير بسبب الامراض اللي بيعانوا منها sometimes في شغلات ما فيهم ياكلوها، لازم يكون عندهم نظام غذائي يكون محدد. مرضى السكري هن من هودي الاشخاص اللي لازم ينتبهوا شو عم بياكلوا. اذا فيك تشرحي لي شوي قبل ما نفوت بموضوع الاكل واكل الاشخاص النظام الغذائي الاشخاص اللي معهم سكري، شو مخاطر مرض السكري بشكل عام؟
So the risk factors for the diabetes.
حاولي عربي يا دكتورة شوي إذا فيك. حاولي شوية عربي إذا فيك.
So carbohydrates is the food is the biggest thing. So carbohydrates we think of riz, batata, hello, things like that, pancakes, cereal. It's a big, very general with the carbohydrates. So with that we have increased weight. This is why nutrition is very important, because increased weight can also cause or help is one of the risk factors that we want to pay attention to. This is one thing that we tell our patients who are pre-diabetes. Weight loss is a big thing for them there.
And that's like mostly an issue I specialize with is the weight loss. So with my business, Healthy Eats Nutrition, what I do mainly is weight loss. So of course I accept clients with diabetes, with like cardiovascular issues, but mainly it is weight loss because it targets all of that.
طيب هلا بنحكي عن هيدي النقطة. أنا كنت بدي أحكي دكتورة عن قصة المخاطر، الريسكس تبع إنه واحد يكون عنده سكري. شو هن المخاطر إنه أنت you have sugar؟ شو ممكن يأثر على الجسم تبع الإنسان؟
Okay, so predisposition. So things that can cause or that can give us the factors to have diabetes. Like we said, family history, other risk factors, blood pressure, cholesterol, smoking. So these are the things that can predispose to having the sugars. Then complications. We can have complications down the line as far as heart issues. So as we already know, the diabetes, especially when it's uncontrolled, it can lead to heart issues. We also have effects on eyes, kidneys, nerves. So if I'm answering your question.
لا اكيد جاوبتني على سؤالي. سو عم بتقولي حضرتك دكتوره بيزيد من نسبه الاصابه بالسكري اذا الواحد بدخن، اذا الواحد عنده كوليسترول، مزبوط؟ هاي بلاد بريشر. كمان ذكرتي كمان انه كمرض سكري بحد ذاته رح يأثر تقريبا على الجسم كله وطريقه عمل الجسم. وهلا بعد شوي لما بيجي الدكتور بينضم لنا للحلقه دكتور تمام، بركي بنحكي معه عن قصه القلب، قديش بيأثر مرض السكري على القلب كمان بهذا الموضوع. بس ذكرتي انه مرض السكري اشخاص اللي يعانون من هذا المرض بيصير عندهم مشاكل بالكدني، بالقلب، باكثر من بالعيون، بالنظر. شو السبب انه كثير اشخاص بتشوف اللي عندهم سكري بيكون بخف نظرهم الى حد الاكستريم، اذا وصلت للاكستريم في منهم بيروح نظرهم؟ شو السبب؟
So it's because the sugar affects the small blood vessels in the eyes. So over time, you can have bleeding there. You can have problems with the actual blood supply there in the eyes. So it depends. It can vary. It can be more mild. It can progress over time. This is part of why we recommend for our diabetics to see an eye doctor, usually once a year or more frequently if needed, because of those effects. Especially if they've been a diabetic for 5 years, we suggest that they have a once follow-up.
كتير منيح. سارة، بموضوع الشخص لما بيكون عنده سكري when they have diabetes وهن they're looking to إنه they're looking at their food intake, off of the top of your head right now شو هن الشغلات اللي لازم هلأ they need to stop eating، يعني لازم هلأ يوقفوا ياكلوها إذا هن عندهم سكري؟
Yeah, so foods you would want to stop eating تشيل من الدايت completely would be foods بيقلبون trans fat, saturated fat, so يعني anything processed. If you go and you get fast food, usually you want to try to aim towards like home cooked meals, not foods you would get from outside. So for example, maybe like donuts, cookies, sugary drinks, things like that, all of those. And kind of your oils too, but the chill oils, the vegetable oils وهيك مش as good as like olive oil because of the fat intake. Any meat بقلبه كتير fat, you want to stay towards اللحمة ما فيها كتير دهن، والchicken بدك تاكلها بلا جلد. هول كتير important عشان you don't want to have a lot of fat in your diet, especially when it comes down to the heart health, lifestyle and diabetes. Yeah.
So بشكل عام الدجاج بلا جلد، اللحمة مش لازم يكون فيها دهن كتير، ولحمة بيضاء أكتر من لحمة حمراء إذا ماني غلطان. كل شيء اكل سريع يعني فاست فود بدك توقفه. شغلات مثل الدوناتس مثل الكوكيز مثل الكاندي هودي كمان بدك تنتبه عليهم توقفهم. حتى الزيوت الشخص اللي بيستعملها مثل هلا اذا شخص بياكل للقلي مش مفروض ياكلوا قلي، لازم ياكلوا بيكت او شيء مش هيك او جريلد.
نعم
مزبوط ايه. فكل شيء في بقلبه ترانس فات وساتوريتد فات بدك تحاولوا تتجنبون لحتى ما تزيدوا من قصة مشاكل الصحية اللي ممكن تنتج من هيدا الموضوع. دكتورة كيف ممكن انه شخص فور اكزامبل تختلف يعني how could يعني حالة من حالة patient to patient يختلف؟ هل يا ترى النظام الغذائي تبع هيدا الشخص ممكن let's say انه واحد معه كان سكري 300 ونفس الشخص معه سكري 300، هيدا متبع نظام صحي ونظام غذائي مزبوط وهيدا متبع نظام صحي ونظام غذائي ما بيسوى. شو الفرق بين هود الحالتين من ناحية تطور الحالة الصحية تبعهم؟
Of course, it's a great question. So everybody is going to be different. So if you have sugars of 300, let's say their diet includes a lot of things that they may not realize is contributing to the sugar. Let's take, for example, the carbohydrates. الرز والبطاطا والخبز, the white bread is what we're referring to. So these will raise the sugar. The big thing that I always like to discuss with patients is the portion size, الكمية. مو بس نوع الأكل, كمان كمية الأكل اللي عم ناكله. So I don't advise anybody to eliminate any kind of food group because this is not realistic. It's very difficult to do something like that. And it's also, I feel that it's not sustainable for a long period of time. So the big thing to consider is moderation in everything. So the carbohydrates, especially the ones we talked about, is one big thing to consider. So it's, as long as it's a smaller percentage of where they're getting their carbohydrates from, this by itself would be helpful. So some tips that we usually discuss is just cutting down from there. So if let's say we have a patient who, let's say they enjoy donuts, okay? إذا بياكل اثنين بنقول okay حاول تاكل واحدة بس or واحدة ونص as a starting point, and then slowly we cut down as possible. So this is realistic and it's a lifestyle change that will help with the sugar too. So a lot of things you may want to consider have a lot of calories in them, and patients may not always realize it. For example, juices, sodas, energy drinks, those have a lot of sugars to it too. So the thing that to keep in mind is, I'll have a patient who might say, I don't think I'm eating that much. And that might be true, but they might be eating things that are high calorie, high carbohydrate. And if you're taking your juice, let's say you drink juice throughout the day, you got the calories for it, but you didn't really feel full because it wasn't enough nutrients in there. It was just juice and it still gave you the calories. So that's one big thing to consider that a lot of people may not realize.
Can I add on to that?
Go ahead.
Okay, so thing a lot of people will notice is, and I've noticed this in myself too sometimes, is if I'm not getting enough nutrients during the day, or let's say I'm having a busy day, I don't have my meals prepared, or I'm not eating all of my meals, I notice later towards the end of the day, I get hungrier because I didn't get my nutrients in. So I like what you said, like about the juices and stuff. That's very true. So you notice بالليل واحد بيجوع أكتر إذا ما بياكل healthier food. Yeah, they're not intaking that.
Yeah, and as you mentioned before, also substituting for water. And now, again, it can be very difficult, especially as you mentioned before. We have certain kinds of sweets that are very well known, very delicious. Also, drinks and things like that. So it's hard to just go from drinking juices and such immediately to water. So you can make some transition, and that will help you as well.
طيب بشكل عام في كتير أشخاص بيقولوا إنه أنا ما باكل كتير، أنا I don't eat a lot during the day، أنا بس باكل one meal during the day. هل يا ترى هيدي صحية إنه واحد بس بياكل one meal during the day مفكر حاله إنه هو ما عم بياكل؟
But see, this is another thing. We want to avoid that. At the end of the day, we want nutrition. We want healthy, nutritious food because the goal is not to be hungry or to feel like you're starving. This is also not healthy. The goal is not immediate weight loss. The goal is slow and steady, and you shouldn't be at a point where you're very hungry, that you're not getting enough food. So one big meal a day, usually we try to advise smaller, more frequent meals in the day that are healthier because it'll keep you more full. And for example, things like proteins might be more filling than other things. So it might be components of what they're eating. It might be a bigger portion of, let's say, carbohydrates or fats, and a smaller portion of the more filling things. Like vegetables will be more filling, proteins will be more filling.
Especially because
سارة بتحبي تفضلي سارة.
نعم.
بتحبي تزيدي شيء عن هذا الموضوع؟
Yeah, عشان الفايبر بقلب whole vegetables, it makes you a lot more full. So that's why we have something that we talk about that's called the plate method. And so what you want to do, يعني الصحن بده يكون half of it vegetables, 1/4 protein, والother 1/4 starch مثل بطاطا. والprotein فيك تعمل سمك, vegetables, you know, you could do any type of vegetables as long as it's non-starchy for that half, for the half of your plate for the vegetables.
تمام. بشكل عام كان سؤالي عن موضوع الاشخاص اللي بياكلوا وجبه واحده خلال النهار وبيفكروا انه هن ما عم بياكلوا كتير، ليش انا عم بنصح او ليش عم بيصير معي هيك. بشكل عام الواحد حسب ما عم بيقولوا ضيوفنا انه لازم ياكل وجبات مش كتير كبيره، يعني يقسم هالوجبه الكبيره على عده وجبات خلال النهار صحيا افضل من كل النواحي، ان كانه صحه ولا ان كانه من ناحيه انه الواحد او يحافظ على وزنه او يخسر وزن. خليني أنا بدنا نكمل حديثنا مع ضيوفنا دكتورة سبلاء علي وسارة شوعير وأخصائية التغذية. خلينا بس نروح على بريك كتير قصير، وبعد البريك بنكمل حديثنا مع ضيوفنا لليوم. ما تروح لبعيد، بريك قصير وبنرجع لكم.
رزق الله على زيتونة بلدنا، فكيف إذا في مطعم بذكرنا بلقمة وريحة وطننا؟ مطعم زيتونة بيقدم لكم أشهى المأكولات الشرقية ومن قلب لبنان سر وصفاتنا الزاكي، مشاوي على الفحم، مقبلات وكل شي بيجي عبالك من مطبخنا اللبناني. مطعم زيتونة بيستقبلكم طيلة أيام الأسبوع داين إن كاري أوت كيترينج. زورونا على العنوان التالي 5700 ميركوري درايف ديربون، هاتف 313-441-4000.
Since 1959, the Hachem family has been synonymous with quality. We now bring that same standard of excellence to the meat business. The meat department at Hashem's of Dearborn Heights is open and ready to serve you. Hashem's, welcome home.
الملك على عرش بيتربع ولحبابه وأبواب أحضانه بيفتح، فكيف لو كان للملك صالة وعنوان هالأصالة؟ صالة الملك بترحب فيكم بكل مناسباتكم، أعراس، خطوبة، تخرج وأعياد ميلاد. بالمختصر نحن هون لنشارككم فرحكم وهدفنا رضاكم. أكلوا لأشهى ومن مطبخنا الشرقي العريق متحفنا. يلا تعالوا لنحتفل ونخلي لفرحكم أحلى ذكرى. صالة الملك، العنوان 28937 وورن رود جاردن سيتي. للحجز الاتصال على 734-469-2727.
أكيد بنرجع لكم بحلقتنا وضيوفنا لليوم الدكتورة سبلاء علي وأخصائية التغذية سارة شوعير من هارت فاسكولار أند انستيتيوت، موجودين في مدينة ديربون، ساوثفيلد وديترويت. رقم التليفون هو 313-791-3000 313-791-3000. فيكم تتواصلوا مع هارت اند فاسكولار انستيتيوت لأي سؤال بما يخص بموضوع أمراض القلب والأوعية الدموية أو أمراض السكري، لأنه الدكتورة سبلاء كمان قسم من الفريق العامل بهارت اند فاسكولار انستيتيوت وبيقدروا يساعدوكم بجميع الأسئلة اللي عندكم إياها بخصوص هذا الموضوع. خليني أرجع لموضوعنا ضيوفنا. دكتورة سبلاء، أمتى أنتم بتقولوا له للشخص تغيير النظام الغذائي ما عادش ينفعك أو ما عادش ينفعك، لازم نحطك على دواء؟
So this is a patient who has diabetes.
إيه أكيد diabetes. إيه.
The question who already has diabetes, not pre-diabetes or before. Okay.
No.
So usually, initially, it depends on what the numbers are. So the medications is depending on several factors. So if the diabetes is already out of control, then we usually start something just to protect from the high sugars, depending on if it's very uncontrolled. If it's slightly elevated, and let's say the patient doesn't have heart issues, we may consider, we always want to do dietary changes, but we might consider waiting for a short period before we start medications. So oftentimes we'll wait about 3 months. So usually it depends on the case itself. So the patient will try diet changes. And remember, also lifestyle changes is not just diet, it's physical activity. So this makes a tremendous difference for weight loss, heart effects, as well as lowering the sugar as well. So we even have patients that are able to cut down on their medications once they've adjusted diet and had physical activity that resulted in weight loss too. So that's something to remember. But usually we do a few months and we reevaluate.
So لما بتقولي physical activities شو هن الشغلات اللي عم بتقولوا لهم يعملوها؟
Yeah, so especially for heart health, and of course this has to do with diabetes as well, but mostly heart health, there's resistance training and another thing that's aerobic exercise. So both of those are like the main two when it comes down to types of physical activity, you know, so those two for sure. I don't know if you'd want to add anything on.
Just to add, even just moderate as they're able to tolerate, even walking. So at a moderate pace, if they're able to, you know, walk if the weather is nice and such. Usually the recommendation is the overall goal. We do suggest 30 minutes, 5 days a week. So, and this is the long-term goal because of course, not everyone may be able to start with that. And we don't say you have to immediately begin with that. But just to have an idea that we do suggest some kind of physical activity on most days of the week.
طيب في سؤالين اجوا. ريناز بيقول قديش لازم يكون مخزون السكر بالنسبه للمريض السكري؟
Okay. So that the hemoglobin A1C. So usually our goal, we aim for below 7%. If we are able to achieve 6.5%, that's also helpful. But again, we base our targets based on the patient's overall health and how their sugar is doing. For example, if a patient is experiencing low blood sugars, we wouldn't want to try just to aim for that. We take it all into consideration. But under 7, if we can get that.
طيب ماي سؤال كتير حلو باي ذا واي لماي. بتقول عمرها 40 سنة وبتشرب 2 cups of tea every day وبقلب كل كاب بتحط 1.5 معلقة سكر. هل يا ترى هي معرضة لأنه يصير عندها مرض سكري بسبب هذا الموضوع؟
So again, moderate use of sugar is not an issue. It's not a problem. It's okay to put some sugar in the tea. So, and 2 cups of sugar, usually this is within a serving size, so that's okay. So it maybe, you know, maybe if she wanted to decrease, that's always better, but it's not an issue as long as it's not excessive. So again, if she wants to try to decrease by a little bit, that would help, but as long as it's within a serving size, it is okay.
شو هو السيرفينج سايز اللي عم نحكي عنه للعالم كسكر؟ قديش لازم ياخدوا انتيك سكر بالنهار؟
So it depends. This really varies because sugar can come from a lot of different foods. So it depends on, let's say, for patients who don't have weight loss or who don't have to lose any particular weight, you know, average size. Keep in mind it comes from different kinds of food. Let's say what they're eating is their carbohydrates. Let's say if it's coming from certain grains. So it's really, I don't have an exact number because it varies. So again, I would say portion sizes based on the foods that they're taking. So looking at nutrition facts, paying attention to what the serving size is, let's say when you're preparing something. So I would follow that, you know, in terms of how much sugar instead of setting an exact amount because this is going to take into account all kinds of sugar from all sources.
طب سارة بشكل عام شو هن الشغلات اللي في بقلبها سكر؟ يعني غير السكر اللي بنعرفه نحن سكر انه اذا واحد حط سكر which is sugar table sugar اذا بتسموه شو هي الشغلات الاكل اللي بياكلوها او الدرينكس اللي بنعملها او whatever it is اللي في بقلبها سكر already؟
So أول شيء بالفواكه في كتير سكر بقلب الفواكه بس يعني this is healthy sugar. It's sugar that's good for your body, you know. So هولي أول شيء. تاني شيء يعني بقلب drinks. Almost most drinks have sugar بقلبهم except إذا بتقرأ الليبل أمراض بيقول إنه zero sugar وهيك بس there's always other additives. So at the end of the day it's mostly fruits. The drinks almost like a lot of the times بقلبها سكر. Really only المي أحلى شيء للواحد بس of course again that goes to the topic of if someone's already used to drinking something and for example let's say someone drinks let's say 100 ounces of like a certain Pepsi or Pop a day and they're used to that, that's something we want to slowly cut them off of. Yeah. Is there anything else you'd want to add about like the sugar that's in things?
Yeah, so you can think of, let's say the natural sugars like in fruits. Yeah. Also dairy has it as well. Like we're talking about milk that can have sugar in it too. And of course the classic sugars that people know of like the carbohydrates, which we have addressed before, the breads and also potatoes, pastas, macaronis, all these will break down into sugar as well. So you even can have some amounts of sugar even in some vegetables. So some of them will be less starchy. So it's in a lot of it's in a lot of sources. But again, these would be more beneficial. Like fruits and vegetables have been shown to be beneficial for heart health as well. And then keep in mind, it's not just sugar. There's a lot of overlap into what kinds of foods, into what categories foods fall into. They can have degrees of fiber in them as well. And fiber is very beneficial for heart health. Also, when we look at carbohydrates, and let's say we look at glycemic index, how much this will raise sugar, how much this will affect the blood sugar, there's a lot to think about too.
طب بشكل عام لما ذكرتي الفروتس سارة في كتير عالم بيقولوا انه don't drink the juice, eat it. Is that true? انه ما تعصروا عصير جوس، انه كله قد ما بدكم، يعني كل اورنج ولا 2 بس ما تعصر كباية اورنج لانه فيها كتير sugar بقلبها.
Exactly. So that's a very good question, actually. I do recommend, especially even to my clients and just to everyone in general, is try to get your sugar intake. Like when you are eating your fruits, try to just eat the fruit. Is I'm tossing juice, that's fine, but make sure that's kind of the only type of sugar you're having that day, because it does equal out to a lot more sugar, double or triple, like depending on how much the size is. But yeah, so if you're trying to lean more towards a healthier lifestyle, I would say, for example, let's say oranges, maybe have 1 or 2 oranges during the day. But if you're going to squeeze orange juice, I mean, 1 or 2 doesn't even make half of a cup. So الواحد راح يكون عم ياكل كتير سكر.
طيب سؤالك سؤال، خلينا ناخذ السؤال دكتورة، واكيد فيك ترجع تزيدي. بتول عم تسأل هل يا ترى البراون شوجر احلى من الوايت شوجر؟
So when you have, let's say you have grains, let's say if you have that are not refined, like white sugars would be in processed food that's been refined, it's always better to have the whole grain. So when you have, let's say, the brown rice and things like that, that will have less count, like less of a glycemic index in it. Plus also the whole grains, which is without being refined. So that will have more fiber in it as well. So I do think that's a better option. So again, we have to keep the portions in control, just like with any food. But I do think it's a better option.
Is,
because it doesn't undergo the refining process that we see.
But then again, that doesn't mean you have like too much of the brown sugar.
ايه سارة، إذا ممكن، إذا عم نحكي نحن I think من خلال سؤالها للحجة بتول، I think people are looking for alternatives. لما أنت قبل شوي قلنا عن sugar craving، إنه شو هن alternatives لما الواحد بده يأكل. لما الواحد for example عم يشرب قهوة أو عم يشرب شاي أو عم يشرب نسكافيه أو كابوتشينو أو whatever the case، أو عم يشرب شيء، إنه شو هن alternatives للsugar. أنا بعرف في عالم بتلجأ أوقات ل شو اسمه هيدا سبلندا، which is كتير سمعنا انه السبلندا منه منيح. It's not good to take Splenda. في عالم for example مثلي انا باخذ ستيفيا for example. شو هن الالترناتيفز for example للسكر اللي هن صحيين وما بيأذوا وما هيك؟ تفضل.
One thing I feel, and also that I know of, is honey and maple syrup help a lot. I mean, not a lot of people would want to put that in their coffee, but if they do want some type of sugar for like smoothies, or if they're making a certain food, I would say honey and maple syrup for sure. Okay. Like you said, stevia as well. But that,
May I add? So as far as the sugar is concerned, to help with the cravings as well. The idea is not to completely stop taking it. If you have a craving for something, go and have, but how about less of a smaller amount? So let's say if you're enjoying a piece of a piece of cake, how about try half of the piece instead, so that this way you've taken what you like but at a smaller amount. Now we can try alternative sugars, like let's say the brown sugar too. That's an option, definitely. So we can also try let's say for example for our caller before, who was using 2 spoons in her tea, I believe she said. So we can try a spoon and a half initially, so that this way she can still enjoy it, but in smaller amounts. This way it's not that she's feeling deprived of it. You can still enjoy it, but just it's a more reasonable amount.
تمام. يعني بشكل عام الواحد ما يحرم حاله من الشغله، بس انه يعني ياخذها بطريقه معتدله، يعني ما ياخذها بطريقه انه تكون كتير big amount، يكون كتير big كبير البورشن او الوجبه او اللي عم تاخذها بهذه الطريقه. في كتير اشخاص بيقولوا انه حاسين في تعب بس يكون عندهم سكري، حاسين بفتيق على طول. شو السبب؟
So في كتير تعب. What was the question?
عم بسأل أنا إنه في كتير أشخاص بيشكوا إنه عندهم fatigue during the day، تعب during the day. هل يا ترى له علاقة بأمراض أو له علاقة بالأكل؟
So there's something, this is a very good question actually. There's something called the mind and gut connection. So whatever is really going on in your head, usually that has to do with like, it can be stress, it can be different things. I mean, everyone's life is different. So whatever is going on, you know, but there's something called the mind and gut connection. So let's say you do have a clean diet, usually you will feel better. Let's say if anything were to happen stress-wise, of course you would still feel it, but there is that connection. So if you have a cleaner diet, you will have that cleaner gut, things of that sort, and then your energy levels will be higher. So that's my approach to it. Yeah.
No.
Just to add to that as well, other things that can contribute to feeling tired too. It could be not enough water intake as well. There can be a degree of dehydration sometimes as well. And also it's a whole, we look at the overall approach, like for example, lack of sleep, certain stress that's happening during the day. All of this can contribute to the diet as well.
تمام. سو بشكل عام عم بيقولوا ضيوفنا انه لما الواحد عم بيحس بحاله تعبان او عنده تعب شديد او الفتيج مثل ما بنقول له نحن بالانجليزي، بيكون لاكثر من سبب. ممكن يكون قصه انه ما عم يشرب انف مي بالنهار، شرب المي كتير مهم خلال النهار، منه نايم كتير منيح او منه نايم كتير منيح، او في ستريس بيكون كمان بيلعب دور غير المشاكل الصحيه اللي ممكن تكون. دكتوره علي، شو هي نسبة الوفيات من المرض السكري؟ هل يا ترى هي كمان هيدي نسبة الوفيات it's related directly للديابيتس، ولا بسبب السايد افكت او بسبب الشغلات اللي بيعملها الديابيتس للأعضاء الثانية الموجودة بالجسم؟
Yeah, so the increase, let's say the increased mortality for patients who have diabetes is higher than patients who don't, for example. So it's a higher likelihood for patients who are diabetics to experience the complications and unfortunately, unfortunate outcomes down the line because of that. Because as we've said, it isn't equivalent to heart issues as well. And a patient who has diabetes has an equivalent chance of developing a heart problem that would be the same as a patient who's already had a heart attack. So we know that the risk is greater. And then the complications, as far as the renal issues, as far as infections, things like that down the line can certainly complicate things and makes recovery more difficult. So those are things to consider with the diabetes, definitely.
شو statistics تبع الأشخاص اللي بيموتوا من الديابيتس؟
So it depends. So that's actually not a statistic that's a general one, because it can be related to different things. It could be heart-related issues. It's not all just from diabetes. It's difficult to say what's just from that as opposed to other things, because it can go hand to hand with other complications.
طيب عم بيسألوكم شو هي الأعراض مرض السكري وخصوصا في بدايته؟ symptoms تبع الديابيتس خصوصا in the beginning.
Great questions. So it could be a feeling of excessive thirst. So usually patients will feel that way. Urination, they'll feel like they have to go to the restroom frequently. Some patients do lose weight unexpectedly. They'll just lose weight over a span of a few months. Those are some signs of the high sugars.
اوكي. طب في اشخاص بياخدوا دواء السكري ليخسروا ويت، بيكون هني ما عندهم ديابيتس بس بياخدوا دواء السكري ليخسروا ويت. How healthy is that?
So we do have some medications because we found such a correlation, of course, with weight loss and improvement of diabetes control and, heart effects as well. So we do have some medications that can help with that too. They're not necessarily weight loss medications, but they're great options because they will help treat the sugar and they'll help with weight loss too. So this is something that's become more known over time that we do try to add for patients.
شو هن الكومن ميديكيشنز اللي بتستعملوهم لما واحد عم يتعالج من السكري؟
Okay, so a lot of patients are already on metformin. This is an oral medication. This is a pill that patients are frequently on. So it's used to help with sugars. It's often a first-line medicine that's given first. And then let's say, depending on how the sugar is, if it's very elevated, of course, we can consider things like insulin injections, things like that. And then for type 2 diabetics, we are able to cut down on that as it improves and switch them to pills. But we also have injections. We have weekly injections that can help decrease the amount of insulin that gets produced in the body, that can help with the stomach emptying, can help slow it down so patients feel like they're more full. This also helps with blood pressure. It helps with weight changes. So those are some options as well. We also have some oral medications that will help patients eliminate their sugar through the urine too. We have a lot of options that we can use.
عم بيسألك خلدون، هل يا ترى الديابيتس تايب 2 is it chronic؟ هل هو مزمن؟
You mean personally in him, is it something that he's had for a long time?
لا، هو عم يسأل هل مرض السكري من النوع الثاني مزمن؟
Is it a chronic condition? Yes. Can it be something that's treated and diet controlled? Yes, absolutely. So it is something that can be diet controlled, meaning they can come off the medication. So even though it may be a chronic, yes, it can be treated.
So it can be في يكون المرض نوع تاني مزمن، بس مثل ما سأل بالقسم الثاني من سؤاله خلدون، هل يشفى من المرض إذا عمل حمية؟ إذا عنده تايب 2 diabetes هل يا ترى they can إنه recover؟ هل يا ترى بيشفوا؟
Yes, it can. You can have some rates of remission after that, meaning that they don't need the medication after. But the important thing to note is that they do need to be followed afterwards. So we do need to recheck after some time just to make sure that it's not something that, we've lost control or that it's come back. Yes, so we have some patients that are.
نعم. ممكن الشخص اللي عنده تايب 2 diabetes انه يصح اذا اتبع ميديكيشن واتبع حمية صحية مضبوطة، بس كمان اذا صح هيدا الشخص، هذا لا يعني انه ليس معرض مرة اخرى انه يرجع ينصاب مرة ثانية بمرض السكري من النوع الثاني. طيب سارة، خلينا نحكي شوي عن التغذية بشكل عام. How would a diet look in a day؟ يعني وصفي لي نهار أنا ترويقة breakfast غدا عشاء for example. How would it look if you want to do it the right way?
Yeah, for example, I can give you an example for a day. So a day of eating would be maybe in the morning. So there's actually two ways. Now that's a good question. Some people, especially a lot of people, what they like to do, they don't get hungry until later in the day. So there's something now that I incorporate, which is called intermittent fasting. So they have a time frame of eating between 12 o'clock to 8 p.m. Or you could just do the traditional in the morning. You have your breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, snack. It's either or. So for example, let's say you have that regular day of eating. In the morning, you can have a cup of oatmeal with blueberries and honey and chia seed. Chia seed actually has omega-3 fatty acids. That's something our body can't develop, but that is more plant-based. And then you can have a snack later in the day. You could do maybe another fruit, or you can have a protein smoothie type thing. I recommend for the protein smoothies to be plant-based. Those help better because of the dairy products. And then later in the day for lunch, you could do like a chicken fattoush with, like potatoes on the side, something like that. And then maybe for a snack after that, because that's how I do it. It'll be like 6 times, during the day. So it'll be the breakfast, the snack, the lunch, the snack, dinner, snack. And then for dinner, you could do like the plate method. So it would be the half of your plate would be like mixed vegetables. 1/4 can be salmon, which also is another omega-3 fatty acid that we were talking about. And you could also do potatoes on the side. And then for your last snack of the day, you could do like mixed nuts, incorporate some type of nuts. Walnuts actually help regulate your, lower your blood pressure, and it helps with that. So that's like an example of a day of eating. And you want to make sure that you are drinking enough water. That's so important. Your sleep and your water intake affect a lot of things. Even if you're exercising and you have a good and healthy diet, those two play a huge role.
طب خليني اخذها وحدي يا سارة بالوقت المتبقي لنا نحن. In terms of times، شو هو الوقت اللي لازم يكون البريكفاست؟ الوقت يعني أي times لازم الواحد يأكل فيهم؟
So you want to have a gap of 2 hours in between each one, between your snacks and your meals. So let's say you eat 8 a.m. your oatmeal, then 2 hours later you have your snack, and so on and so forth. It really all depends on what time you start eating. But I would say every 2 hours. You want to do that 2-hour gap, yeah.
Every 2 hours. طيب أي ساعة لازم يكون آخر ميل لك قبل ما تنام؟ When should be the time for the last meal؟
نعم، أنا بقول للواحد يوقف يعني 3 ساعات أو 4 ساعات قبل ما ينام before bedtime. because it helps you sleep better, to be honest, and it helps with the digestion portion of when you're eating. So you don't want to eat too late. So let's say, I mean, sometimes I recommend stop eating at 6 o'clock if you sleep at 10, or stop eating at 7 if you sleep at 10. It all depends, but 3 to 4 hours before bed.
وقت تقولوا واتر، لما نقول water intake قديش الwater intake لازم يكون بالنهار؟
So it does vary for everyone, but the average would be 8 cups for each person, but it's different again for everyone's body type. People that are a little on like the heavier side or bigger side would have to drink more water, usually towards a gallon. You know, it really all depends on the person.
How about sleeping بالنسبة للنوم؟ قديش؟ How many hours?
Yeah, 7 to 9 hours. That's also like, yeah.
طيب.
May I also add?
تفضلي دكتورة.
So in terms of, let's say, the meals, for our diabetic patients who are on medications, especially our insulin-treated diabetic patients, consistency with what they're eating, timing of food, let's say consistent time from day to day, makes a difference in terms of the medications as well. So it can help with that too. So if they're set to a certain diet, or if they're set to certain things they like for breakfast or lunch, that makes, you know, that can be a little bit more consistent as far as their sugar. So it's not fluctuating from day to day where it's totally unpredictable. So that plays a role with the sugars as well for our medication-treated patients.
So قديش بهيدي بدي اختم فيها دكتورة علي، قديش مهم يكون في الرقم اللي عم بيطلع بكل يوم لهيدا المريض تبع السكري او للشخص اللي حتى اللي منه مريض بالسكري، قديش مهم انه هيدا الرقم يضل كونستانت، انه ما يطلع 100 ينزل 100، انه يضل انه within قديش المارجن اوف لازم يكون؟
That's actually our goal, is so that you don't have fluctuation. Because let's say if there's fluctuation between, you know, 20 to 30 points, let's just use, you know, an arbitrary number, that's way different than if their sugar is, you know, 150 one day, 250 the next day. This is what we try to avoid, the up and down, the consistency, because then we know if their medications are working or if we need to make adjustments depending on their sugar patterns too. So that is very important, the consistency.
تمام. طب نحن وصلنا لنهاية الحلقة. تفضلوا إذا بتحب دكتورة بنبلش معك تعملي final remarks بحيالله كلمة بتحب توجهيها للمشاهدين اللي عم يتسمعوا لنا أو بيحضرونا.
I just wanted to say thank you, and just to make sure that we're, you know, following up for prevention of possible diabetes mellitus. Thank you for having us.
أهلا وسهلا. أهلا وسهلا. سارة تفضلي.
Yeah, as a closing statement, I would say for a heart healthy lifestyle, there are 4 topics that I like to talk about, and I did kind of already go over it, but that is like the heart healthy diet. Number 2 would be make sure you're taking care of like managing your stress. Number 3 would be physical activity, and lastly would be your sleep. So those are the main 4 topics. Of course, we got into them in more detail, but yeah, that would be my closing statement. Thank you so much for having me.
أهلا وسهلا فيكي سارة، وأهلا وسهلا فيكي دكتورة علي. نحن انبسطنا بوجودكم معنا اليوم، أول مرة بتطلعوا معنا على الويب تي في، فأهلا وسهلا فيكم، سعدنا بوجودكم معنا. أكيد اللي بيحب يتواصل مع مركز هارت اند فاسكولار انستيتيوت موجودين في مدينة ديربون، في مدينة ديترويت، وفي مدينة ساوثفيلد. رقم التليفون هو 313-791-3000 313-791-3000. بإمكانكم أن تتواصلوا معهم. سارة، شو الكمباني تبعك وشو رقم التليفون؟
Yeah, it's Healthy Eats Nutrition. So on the Instagram, I usually use the Instagram mainly. Or phone number, same as the office, or there's an alternative one, 313-559-7501. I mainly answer through the Instagram page. So it's Healthy Eats Nutrition.
Healthy Eats Nutrition. يلا فولو سارة عن انستغرام، واكيد كمان هارت اند فاسكولار انستيتيوت موجودين مثل ما قلنا لكم. وشكرا اكيد لضيوفنا لوجودهم معنا اليوم في هذه الحلقه. تكلمنا عن مرض السكري، تكلمنا عن النظام الغذائي والتغذية وتأثيرهم على الأمراض وتأثيرهم على الجسم. تحدثنا في أكثر من موضوع، حلقة كتير مهمة إن شاء الله بترجعوا بتتابعوها، رح تكون متوفرة على صفحتنا على الفيسبوك، على قناتنا على اليوتيوب، وعلى الويب سايت اللي هو www.whatsappmedianetwork.com. بنهاية الحلقة بنحب نعتذر عن عدم وجود الدكتور تمام معنا في هذه الحلقة نظرا لانشغاله، وكان عنده مرضى عم بيعملوا فيزيتس فما قدر انه يطلع معنا بالحلقه. ان شاء الله المره الثانيه بيكون معنا ونتحدث نحن وياه اكثر واكثر عن هذه المواضيع، الى ان نلتقي في حلقات مقبله من هيدا البرنامج. كان معكم حسين هاشم من قناه العرب في امريكا شو الاخبار ويب تي في. الى اللقاء، وان شاء الله بنشوفكم على الساعه 9:30 اليوم بحلقه جديده من برنامج جلسه الديفا الساعه 9:30 مساء بتوقيت شرق الولايات المتحده الامريكيه. الى اللقاء ونشوفكم بعد شوي.